I'm happy to talk to Deborah Cobb-Clark, who is the director of the Melbourne Institute of Applied Economics and Social Research. And her research is on the effects of social policy on labor market outcomes, and she just gave a talk about evidence-based policy. So my first question would be, what are the main goals of the redesign of the Australian tax system?
The Australian tax system. So at the moment, we're working hard at sort of refining the transfer part of the tax and transfer system. So that is the social safety net. And what we're hoping to do is to make it more simpler without losing the targeting that we get by having all of these different benefits. The reason that we're concerned about that is that we're trying to make it more efficient and more sustainable going forward. And we're doing that because we're trying to bring the government budget back into surplus. And so at the moment we're sort of focused on the spending side rather than on the tax side.
Okay, so you said like you wanted to install a system like the New Zealand model. Could you maybe explain to us what is it about?
So it's called the New Zealand investment model. And essentially what they're trying to do is use evidence-based policy in a serious way and over the life cycle, to try to think about where they ought to be making certain kinds of investments. So recognizing that government resources are always limited and that what you're trying to do is figure out how to spend them in the best possible way. What they're then doing is using what they know about the age at which people benefit the most, what kind of investments are best, and the goal then is to try to prevent sort of people moving on to the welfare rolls and instead improving their ability to get jobs and to work.
Okay. So more generally, how important is free access to data for meaningful economic policy analysis?
Well, certainly some access to data is really important, because if you don't have the data, then you have nothing to work with. So I always think the data are the real asset, that if a government's going to make an investment, that making an investment in good data is the first thing to do. If you don't like the results of the policy analysis, you can always fire the consultants and get new consultants. But the investment in the data is pretty important. Now, having said that, it doesn't always have to be freely publicly available, right? So we have a number of data sets which are freely available, and they're freely available to people all over the world. And then we have other data sets which you can really only access in Australia. And then we have other data sets where you can access them only in secure data rooms or under certain kinds of contractual arrangements with the government. So it's not necessary that everything be kind of publicly available, like, say, SUP. But at some point, we have to have data or we're not going to be able to do anything.
Okay. And in Australia, what are the like your best data sets, like the most meaningful ones?
Yeah. So where we have our comparative advantage would be in immigration data. So that's, again, because 25%, 1 in 4 people in Australia is actually foreign born. 40% are either immigrants or children of immigrants. So that means that any national data collection that we do, we have a large group of immigrants. And the Immigration Department's always had good data. We have comparative advantage in a lot of welfare data surrounding the social safety net, because we have these administrative data and we have relationships with the government that allow us to draw samples of them and to run surveys on them. Where we lack data, we have less data than Germany, I would say, on the employment side, because we don't have a system of sort of employment registry, and that means that we don't have a sampling frame to go out and do some sort of linked employer-employee data set.
Okay. So, and now maybe the rather political question. Would you be willing to comment on the new Australian government, and mainly in the context of evidence-based economic policy?
So we've gone through probably 5 years of sort of very I'm not going to say unstable in the sense that we're not about to have a coup, but sort of fragile political relationships, which have meant that the government's really been consumed by politics. And so we had a change in government not that long ago, about 18 months or so ago. The government is trying to find its feet, but it didn't win enough support in the election to be able to form government on its own. And so what that has meant is that they've had to reach out to some of the independents, not all of whom appear completely sensible. And so that's making it very difficult at the moment. My sense is that the government, the ministers have stopped largely relying on the public servants to provide them sensible policy advice. They are listening to political advisors, and that some of what we're getting is just not completely well thought out. The budget that the government laid down in May has not been popular, and so it's not likely to find support in the Senate, and that's meant that we're in a bit of a political limbo because we don't exactly know which bits of the budget are going to go forward and which bits aren't. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty at the moment. So given all of that, there isn't anyone really paying much attention to the evidence because the decisions are being made for sort of political reasons.